Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be turning my attention back to Attack Sub because a while ago I had a request to play through a complete mission involving submarine forces ranged against surface forces, and I'm more than happy to do that because I love this game too. It's another of my favorite card-based war games. And while the submarine versus submarine action is great fun, the submarine versus surface ship element of this game takes it to a whole new level. Now, one of the things I like about Attack Sub is while it probably takes a while to get your head around the mechanics, particularly when it comes to how detection works in this game. There's some elements that are a bit counterintuitive when you first open the box. Another thing that can be quite confusing is that surface ships behave very differently to submarines in the game. Now, the submarines I find actually are programmed in the rules to operate in a very simple and straightforward way. So it comes as a little bit of a system shock when surface ships are introduced into the ecosystem. So my hope with this video is that it will clear up some of the uncertainties about how surface ships work. Because in many respects, they do work like the submarines. They perform a lot of actions individually. But then there are some actions like moving. If you play a close open range card on them, they behave like a squadron. They do it collectively, and the card applies to both vessels. And that can lead to a fair bit of head scratching. So I've set up a mission. This is actually the first of the submarine versus surface vessel scenarios in the Attack Sub game box. And it's a fairly straightforward scenario in which a Soviet attack force, i.e., the two submarines here, have got wind of a NATO convoy heading for Iceland. Now, satellite intel has alerted NATO that these subs are on their way. So these two surface ships have been detached from the convoy's escort with orders to sink and destroy. Now, just a quick word about the forces. They're a very interesting mix. Those of you who watched my previous Attack Sub video will probably recognize the Skvortsov, the veteran of that very brutal one-sided battle where the pair of ace Soviet hunter-killers took out two of their US Navy opposite numbers. That was, I mean, that is a crack sub. That is not one to mess with. But she's been paired up with a very different beast. This is Molnya, and she is arguably the worst nuclear submarine in this game. But of course, this is quite realistic because Soviet strategy in the 1980s counted so much on an advantage in numbers. But the price you pay for that is, in order to make those numbers up, you have to keep a lot of your older and more doddery models in service. And the November class was barely acceptable by the mid to late 1980s, and yet she is here. So I can imagine that the captain of the Skvortsov is probably fuming. I don't know where his squadron mate is. The Ivan Rogov is probably in dock for refit. And while he feels he should be out there hunting his own kind because it's what he's supposed to do, instead he's finding himself in the unenviable role of shepherding this outdated whale towards a NATO convoy so it can sink a few merchant ships. The U.S. Navy force is much better balanced. You've got the enormous guided missile cruiser USS Virginia, which is a very impressive warship with a good anti-submarine weapon suit, but she's not optimized for anti-submarine warfare. The USS Simpson is a slightly better shout in that she has better sonar and can launch helicopters. That's a major advantage for surface ships. But then she has a smaller weapons outfit and it's a bit less lethal. So, in a sense, they're going to have to work together. The Simpson and her helicopters are going to have to be the eyes, and the Virginia is going to have to be the crushing fist that swings into action when the Simpson tells her what's going on. Now, before I start the game, I'm just going to point out another very obvious difference. Those of you who have seen the previous videos will remember that each submarine keeps its own contact level on other vessels in the game. So you can't share information with a fellow submarine. They didn't have the ability to talk between ships, as far as I know, back then. Or if they did, they couldn't do it without increasing the risk of detection. So, to all intents and purposes, the two Soviet submarines are not mutually supporting. They can't directly help each other. Surface ships, on the other hand, by virtue of being on the surface, have no such worries. They are data linked, which is why there is only one contact level counter on the Soviet submarine. So, what one ship in the force sees, every ship in the force sees. And that is actually quite powerful. A well played surface force can find a sub, pin it down, and engage it very rapidly. So it's a major worry for the Soviet player. The trade off, of course, is surface ships are noisier. You can see, compared to how quiet the Skvortsov is, both the Virginia and the Simpson are noisy as anything. But then, of course, Skvortsov is shackled to the living corpse that is the Molniya, and her current detect value, i.e., the amount of noise she chucks out from her dated propulsion system, it really shows she is as noisy as the noisiest NATO surface ship. And that's just embarrassing. Her sonar suit is terrible with a rating of 1. Now, I don't think that's just a reflection on her sonar equipment. It's a reflection of how little was understood about interference with regards nuclear submarines and their associated systems when this class was designed, because a lot of her blindness comes from the noise she generates herself and poor placement of her detection systems within the hull. So Molniya's not great, is the point I'm not so subtly trying to make. But be that as it may, she's still formidably powerful in terms of her weapons array, and bad though her sensors are, she probably has a good chance of detecting at least the Virginia. So let's see how we go. Now, I tossed a coin for this earlier, and the Soviets won the toss by way of initiative. Now, mission profile. It's an open-ended scenario, there's no time limit, and normally, if there's no specific victory conditions given, the idea is that you win by sinking all the enemy vessels. However, it's also possible to obtain victory by sinking at least one enemy vessel and then successfully breaking contact with your ships or submarines. That counts as a win too. If you get a higher total of sunken enemy ships and exited friendly ships than your opponent does, then you win. I'm going to play this differently for both sides. The Soviets are trying to get at the convoy. That's their primary target. They don't really want to get into a punch-up with escorts, even if they feel they can take them on. That's not what they're there for. So I'm going to play the Soviet side as if sinking one of the US vessels would be sufficient, and then they try to slip past. If necessary, they will try and sink the other one if it's making too much of a nuisance of itself. The NATO side I'm going to play very differently. The surface ships have a very specific find and destroy mission, so that is what they're going to do. So, that being the case, let's see what happens. So the starting Soviet hand is not too bad, but they only have the one sonar detection card to hand. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play the Soviets fairly aggressively. So the Skvortsov has the better sonar, so she is going to take the risk by banging away with her active systems and seeing what she gets. Now, looking at the NATO hand, this is probably not a good move. So as the Virginia has the better anti-submarine weapon systems, I'm going to react on her behalf with the passive sonar card, which automatically detects Skvortsov, irrespective of whether Skvortsov's search is successful. And I'm also at the same time going to shield the Simpson. Now, Skvortsov was going to try and detect both vessels, so each vessel can react with a card of its own. So Virginia settled for detecting Skvortsov. Simpson is going to try to hide from Skvortsov because, of course, she benefits from the Virginia's detection. So let's see how the Soviets do. Skvortsov's sensor rating is a 3, and her random number draw is a 0. So, embarrassingly, she fails to detect the noisier Virginia. And for trying to detect the somewhat more modern and quieter Simpson, her sonar rating is reduced to. Wait, I lie. Sorry, hold on. Rewind a bit. Skvortsov's sensor rating was 4 because that's active sonar. It increases it. Now, embarrassingly, she still failed to detect the Virginia. But for the purposes of trying against Simpson, her her sensor level remains at 3 because the active sonar bonus and the contact reduction for surface noise cancel each other out. So 3 plus, oh dear, that's bad news. That denotes a malfunction. So poor old Skvortsov has started off really badly, particularly for a crack submarine. Hope I didn't curse her by saying that's what she was. So she gets a malfunction level 1 until her sensors are fixed, either through a successful random number draw or the play of a technician card. Her sensors are now rated at 2. Not a great start for the Soviets, and all they can do now is draw a card. Now, NATO had a really good turn, although they start not being able to do very much. The Simpson, however, can launch a helicopter, of which she has 1. You'll notice her card's attack value has a split rating, 1 and +1. The top left is how many helicopters she can have in play at one go. So she's going to launch a helicopter. Now, these are quite powerful in that they act as the equivalent of another vessel in your force. So as long as that chopper remains in the sky, excuse me, the NATO hand size will go up by 1, which is great because their hand size is already 5. This brings it up to 6. As you can see, helicopters have their own sensor and attack ratings, quite respectable sensor and attack ratings. Although they don't stay in the sky for very long, you have to check a helicopter's endurance after each action it takes. And also, if during the course of play, if you draw a helicopter card as a random number check, that also triggers an endurance check for your helicopter. That said, helicopters are normally subject to only 1 endurance check every turn. So I'm just going to place the helicopter card off to the side here. Just so you know how an endurance check works, you see this icon up here with a reminder that it's equal to or greater than 3. Whenever the Simpson has to conduct an endurance check for its helicopter, it draws a card, and if the number exceeds or equals 3 in this case, the helicopter can stay aloft. Otherwise, it needs to land, and in game terms, what happens? The card is discarded. So NATO has launched a helicopter. They can't do anything else at the moment, but they can draw 4 cards, which is quite impressive. Admittedly, some they can't use, but never mind. 2 they can't use. That grey stripe at the top of the card with the submarine icon denotes that these cards can only be played by submarines, not surface ships. So I imagine NATO will be discarding these at the first opportunity. Back to the Soviets. What are they going to do? Their choices are terrible. They can't actually see the US ships. And they have a bit of an awkward choice. These early firing cards are actually a good thing to have. But what to do? They could either discard some cards and hope they draw some good ones, or they could spend the turn trying to fix Skvortsov's sonar. I think on balance, it's probably better if they improve their options. So they're going to take a bit of a risk, and they're going to discard. It's a tough call. They're going to discard the close open range card and one of the weapon lock-on cards. Living dangerously, but it may prove worth it. They could have done with those last turn, but never mind. They can try and break NATO's lock on them this turn. Assuming NATO lets them, I'm going to put these two at the back of the hand because they're useless. The temptation is for NATO to simply close because the Russians have no lock on them whatsoever. And that passive detection card is handy to keep as a reaction to any future Soviet detection attempts. So they're going to play a close range card. Now, normally, if they could see them, the Soviets would be able to try and counter it with a card of their own, but they can't. So the surface force is closing in on the Skvortsov, and the Skvortsov is blissfully unaware. So as I said earlier, when a movement card is played, every surface ship and helicopter is converging on that one target. And because I've just done that, it counts as an action for the helicopter. I have to make an endurance check. A 4, it passes, so it's still in the sky. Now, if that had been for anything else, drawing a helicopter card would have triggered an endurance check anyway, but it already had to do one, so it's staying in the air. And that movement card counted as an action for every unit, so they can't play any other cards unless they have a battle station card that allows play of another different action. So they're fairly happy with that. They'll draw a card. Damage control could come in useful later, but hopefully it's one of those cards you hope you don't have to use. What about the poor Soviets then? I think as a priority, the Skvortsov wants to hide. So they're going to attempt contact reduction. Now, because they're not playing this passively, they're going to have to draw that random number check. They needed a 4 or greater and they got a 3. So unfortunately, despite some choppy weather on the surface, let's say creating less than ideal sonar conditions, the NATO ships still have a pretty good lock on the Soviets. And drawing another card, they've just got a pretty decent attack card, but they can't use them because they can't see anything. Back to NATO. Now they've got up to contact level 1, but they only have contact level 3 weapons, which is a bit frustrating. So in the interest of preserving their helicopter for not wanting to subject it to too many stresses, the Virginia has decided she's going to play the passive detection sonar card. The Skvortsov, not wanting her life to get any worse, is going to play her the other Russian contact reduction card as a reaction to that. So Virginia is going to attempt to detect both submarines, by the way. So starting with Skvortsov, her sensor value is 2, and it's reduced to 1 in Skvortsov's case. Ooh, good draw for NATO. Despite the continuing chop and noise, the Virginia has strengthened her contact level on the Skvortsov. And of course, she gleefully shares this information with the Simpson and the helicopter. What about poor old Molniya? Molniya doesn't even have a reaction card, so Virginia's sensor value is 2, plus 1, 3. Oh, fairly miraculous. So Virginia detected the quieter submarine, or increased her lock, but has still failed to detect the really noisy one. Someone up there must love elderly Soviet naval tech. But never mind, that's still good for NATO. They're onto a strong contact there. So they will draw their card, and happy days, it's another close range card. They're going to be chucking torpedoes at the Skvortsov very soon if the Soviets can't do anything. And unfortunately, they can't. They're going to take another huge risk, and instead of trying to fix their sonar, they will discard. They'll discard that card. The rationale is they'd like to have one that they could shoot from the hip for emergencies. And of the two contact level 2 attacks, that one is better, so that one can go. And they get more attack cards and an evasive action card. Well, no complaints there. They may be needing it soon. NATO. Okay, they just need to get one more contact level and they can start doing very unpleasant things. So they're going to play a close range card, which the poor Skvortsov can do nothing about because she hasn't the faintest idea that they're out there. And I'll just draw the endurance check for the helicopter. Great! The helicopter is doing fine for fuel, and the weather conditions are evidently still good, so she's staying where she is. And next turn, there's going to be some torpedoes dropping. And look, even if their helicopter has to land, the Simpson will be ready to put up another one almost immediately. Now, our poor Soviet friends, I think the only reasonable option they have, well, they've got some good evasion cards, but they need some detection desperately, so they're going to discard another card. Finally, the question is, will they live long enough to make use of this? If NATO has its way, the answer to that is absolutely not. So on the NATO side, we've got two weapon lock-on cards, both very formidable attacks. Let's be thematic. The two more powerful anti-sub equipped units are the Virginia and the Simpsons helicopter. Now, as that one packs a bigger wallop, I'm going to be a bit thematic and say that that is fired by the Virginia at the Skvortsov. But first, the helicopter is going to drop that one. Because actually, to be honest, the Virginia could hold on to that and see how well the helicopter does first. So, helicopter's attack rating is +2, which means that the total attack strength of this would be 5. The Skvortsov in desperation is going to drop a noisemaker to make that a 4. And the Molniya is going to capitalize on the oh no, she can't. No, yes, that is a huge advantage. Helicopters cannot be detected by submarines, so the Molniya cannot actually play a sonar card. However, if one of the ships then subsequently attacks, she can do so. But in the meantime, for the present, I mean, the Simpsons helicopter has things all her own way. So total attack rating of 4, which has to beat the Skvortsov's electronic countermeasures defense rating of 8. And it's a hit. So what happens to the Skvortsov? The damage is attack times 2, which is enough to sink the submarine. That was a very, very classy piece of anti-submarine work. So fairly early on in the scenario, the Skvortsov has been sunk. And that's really bad for the Soviets because that is their much more capable unit, which has just been got rid of. And let's see if the helicopter passes its endurance check while I'm busy removing the poor Skvortsov's detection tokens, contact level tokens. She never even saw her assailants. It was that bad. The job is well done. The helicopter has to land. Presumably her weapons tray is empty now. So that leaves the NATO ships with the job of tracking the Molniya, which they cannot see yet. Now, they don't have any detection cards, but because the Simpson has not technically taken an action yet, she can simply replace her landed helicopter by launching another one. Really bad news for the Soviets. And having done that, NATO can draw 2 cards, and find their hand is clogged with a lot of stuff they can't use. Meanwhile, poor old Molniya, who never got a chance to react because none of the surface ships did anything she could react to last turn. She's going to be as careful as she can with this one. And rather than use the active side, even with her weak sonar, she's going to go passive because the last thing she wants is the prospect of the NATO ships counter-detecting her. Now, as it turns out, there's nothing they can do about this, but we'll see whether she gets anywhere. So her sensor value is 1. Yes, sigh, 1. She's going to try and detect the Virginia first. And she does it. Well done, Molniya. And against the Simpson, 1 + 5 for a 6. Yes, that was a wonderful piece of sonar work, given all the disadvantages she's operating under. So the tables have very abruptly turned. It's now the NATO ships that are blindly groping for the other Soviet submarine, while she is now stalking them. And next turn, the Soviets are very glad they kept that fire from the hip attack. She might be able to chance an attack. But you'll draw a card for now, and that is a very useful one to have. So, back to NATO. They can't see the Molniya, and they really need to find her, but the problem is they have no sonar cards. So what they'll do is they'll discard these 3 cards that they cannot use. Draw another 3. Exactly what they wanted. Well, the first one was at any rate. Always good to have a backup helicopter as well. Right, Molniya, what do we do? Of the 2 ships, the Simpson is the weaker structurally. She's smaller and has less survivability. So in a desperate attempt to even the odds, Molniya is going to take that hip shot, targeting the Simpson. And this may bring a whole load of trouble down on her head. But as it happens, it doesn't. NATO has no appropriate reaction cards to that attack. So another, fortune is smiling on Molniya here. So her attack value versus surface ships is +2, added to the fire strength is 3 in total. There's no reaction from the very surprised Simpson. And she draws a 6, okay. Sorry, a 3 for a total of 6, I mean. It was a good attempt, but the range was too great and the target lock was not sufficiently strong. So, much to Simpson's relief, the torpedo misses, but they still don't know where it came from. And the Molniya will probably get another chance, if she quite literally plays her cards right. So, back to the US Navy. The most obvious tactic, I think, without compromising the surface ships, is to get that helicopter dropping some sonar buoys, and that's exactly what she's going to do. Because the sonar, the active sonar is coming from a helicopter, again, the Molniya can do nothing. If it was one of the surface ships, she would have been able to counter-detect them. So helicopter's sensor rating is 2 + 1 for 3. And her number draw is a 6. That gives NATO plenty, and the Molniya is now detected. Helicopter's endurance, she passes. So she is still aloft. They can't do anything else for the moment, so they're just going to draw. Aha. Most useful. So the Molniya's in a bit of trouble now. She's got another good attack card, but she's going to have to increase her contact level. So she's going to carry on using passive sonar. Again, NATO has no useful comeback, so no doubt praying for a favourable response. Molnir is going to try and up the contact level on both ships. So Virginia, it's 1 plus... No, she doesn't do it. That was a total of 4. And against the Simpson... No, poor old Molnir. Her systems are just not up to the job, unfortunately. So she's going to have to try a bit harder. Ambitious. If only Skvortsov was still here. So it's going to, as always, degenerate into a bit of a race to see who gets that contact level up first. Now, the fact that Molnir can see them is hugely annoying for the NATO task force because it carries a big risk if they play that card to close the range, because it will only help Molnir see them better. So what they're going to do is they're going to try and stretch the odds in their favour a bit. The helicopter's going to drop another line of sonar buoys. Don't know how many she's got in there, but hopefully it's a good number. Again, Molnir can't do anything, so total detect value of 3. And they do it. Yeah, they are running poor old Molnir to ground here. And just to add insult to injury, the helicopter passes its endurance test again. So they'll draw a card. Oh, more of these. Maybe it would be worth them charging her. So Molnir, poor Molnir, there is no way she's going to get to use that possibly within the scope of this game. And a helicopter card is useless. It's unplayable by a submarine. So she is going to throw those 2 out and draw some fresh cards. Oh, that could come in very handy soon. And that's nothing to complain about either. Now the question is, what should NATO do? They have a very powerful attack card, which if they can get close enough to use it, would probably settle Molnir's hash. And they do have exactly the right number of close range cards to do what they want to do. The question is, if they do that, what are the odds of Molnir sinking one of them as they come in? It's a bit like the ultimate game of chicken. They're going to take a chance because they can see the end is in sight. They dispatched a really modern Soviet hunter-killer SSN with almost contemptuous ease. What can this doddery old relic from the previous decade of the Cold War possibly do to them? So they're going to close the range. Molnir has no choice but to let them, and this is where things get a bit interesting. So with the play of the close range card, the squadron's contact level goes up on Molnir, but equally Molnir's contact level on each US ship is improved, and the helicopter has to do its endurance check, which it passes. Well done, that chopper. So that brings her up. Oh, another card that NATO can't use as they refill their hand. Okay, I think at least a few of the officers and possibly the men on Molnir are sweating buckets now. But thanks to NATO's aggressive behaviour, they're able to launch their attack first. So a torpedo goes whizzing off in the direction of the Simpson. Again, take out the weaker ship that's capable of launching helicopters. And again, there's no reaction from NATO, so Molnir has a good chance with this one. Fire attack strength of 3 plus her weapons rating of 2 makes for 5. And the random number is 8. That's exactly what they needed to score a hit. So let's see what's happened. Attack times 2. Oh dear. That's bad. That torpedo rips the Simpson apart. And because she's the only vessel in the squadron with the link to the helicopter, as the Simpson jackknifes and starts to go under, The helicopter is presumably still there, but is no longer able to share data and effectively communicate with the Virginia. So this has now turned into a one-on-one. And actually, given how empty the sea's looking, I might just zoom in so you can see the surviving combatants more clearly. Interestingly enough, the survivals on both sides are the older and, for this sort of purpose, arguably slightly less capable vessels. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. But that was an excellent turn for Molniya and quite a comeback for the Soviets. So Virginia is now largely blinded and not able to do much. What's she going to do? This has become very risky now because she could carry on the attack by closing on the Molniya and then hoping nothing bad happens to her so she can launch that very, very formidable attack the turn after. This is an enormous risk, especially one to take with a valuable guided missile cruiser like her, but I think if I were the commander, I would take it. So she is going to close the range regardless. And again, Molniya can do nothing to stop her. So the contact level is now 3 on both vessels. Worse, the Virginia can't draw any new cards because her hand size is too big. So she's a bit stuck there. Actually, let me just remind myself. I think she might have to discard cards immediately. Let me just check. Rulebook, where are you? Okay, yes. Sorry about that. I had a temporary brain failure. They don't have to discard down, but of course they can't draw any new cards until their hand size drops below 4, which, given that they're taking actions every turn, discarding's not going to be an option at the moment. So back to Molniya. Now, frustratingly for the Soviets, they have no weapon cards in hand. So they're going to try and get a bit of an edge, but they're going to do it very cautiously by playing that card as a passive sonar card. The Virginia, of course, has nowhere to hide because her only defensive cards against that sort of thing are only playable by submarines. So let's see if Molniya's very doddery sonar can do the job. 1 plus 0. No, she gains no advantage from that. But she does have a bit of an overstock on active sonar. Unfortunately, she is out of time. This may well decide the game. We'll see if Virginia can do it. So her attack strength is +2 with a formidable total of 6 there. In desperation, the Molniya is going to play her most powerful evasive action card by throwing a decoy out. So that brings the total level down to 4. So 50-50? 4 plus 3 for 7. Incredibly, the decoy manages to throw off Virginia's torpedo. Huge sigh of relief from the Molniya. And again, the Virginia frustratingly cannot draw any new cards, although she could discard those 3 next turn. The Molniya, feeling a bit more confident, is going to try raising the stakes with her sonar. So detection rating of 2 plus 3. No. Fortune is favouring her in some respects, but not with her sonar. That is not having a good day of things, despite the fact that she's got lots of sonar cards. However, that may help keep her safe. Virginia can do nothing this turn except discard, but she will get rid of the 3 cards that she cannot use. Again, hopefully she won't have to find herself using that one. Okay, not bad. No weapon cards, annoyingly, but, you know, those will do. Safety first for Molnir, I think. She's going to play that contact reduction card. If she draws a random number of 3 or greater... no. No, that thermal layer, ducking under it was a good idea, but unfortunately the Virginia's systems are somewhat better than that. I suppose the Technician is useful if you suffer a breakdown, but not so good at stopping incoming ordnance, unfortunately. Virginia's going to apply the same logic on her turn and see if the continuing bad weather on the surface can break Molnir's lock a bit. And it does. Much to Molnir's frustration, the strong propeller noises are beginning to recede. Drat. Virginia draws a card. Exactly what she wants. If only she can maintain her lock until next turn. Molnir is going to try to get the Virginia back any way that she can. Virginia cannot respond to this, so it's going to be a 1 + 0. Ah, poor old Molnir. She's trying so hard, but the old electronic eyes are just not up to it. Well, she'll get plenty of opportunities to keep trying, that's for sure. But Virginia, of course, has no intention of giving her that time. So happy with their target lock, they're going to launch another attack. So fire strength of 4 plus her attack value of 2 for 6. The Molnir has a choice. She could respond to it with the passive sonar card and increase her own lock. But it's a bit of a pointless thing to do because she has no weapon cards in hand. So I think self-preservation is going to rule this one, and she's going to do a high-speed turn to try and escape, reducing the Virginia's attack strength to 5. And it works again. The weapons officer on Virginia cannot believe what his scopes are telling him. That wily Rusky has wiggled away from him again. So it seems our little game of cat and mouse continues. Feeling a bit safer now, the Molnir will try and detect or increase her contact level on the Virginia. So oh no! Disaster strikes. The poor overworked computer finally gets fed up and goes, no, had enough of this. So this is catastrophic because not only is the Molnir's detection rating now, the sensor value reduced to 0, but she loses a contact level on the Virginia. I know what card she'll be playing next turn. That's... Ooh, look at that. Just like buses. 2 of them turn up after a long absence. Okay, Virginia, what are we going to do? Well, the only obvious course of action is to go onto active sonar and see if we can get the maximum possible lock, and then hope for some weapons cards. Molnir can do nothing about this. So total detection rating of 3, easy. They have such a good lock on Molnir, and they can hear her so clearly they can probably identify her by name from the propeller noises. There's a depressing thought for the Russians. Okay, Molnir has some really terrible choices. She could try to flee, But that would be a really bad idea because if the US let them do it, they would lose the Virginia, and Virginia would still have a very strong lock on her. They could try to close with the Virginia and be very aggressive, or they could try and fix their sonar. I think, given that Virginia already has the maximum possible lock on them, the best they can do is just head straight for her and hope that they get a weapon card before she does. Now, because she has got such a good hold on them, the Virginia has no intention of letting them do this and cancels their close range card by keeping the range open. So there's another crushing disappointment for one side. Although, unfortunately, having done that, the Virginia can do nothing except... Yeah, she's going to go for it. She's going to discard these two cards. A huge, huge risk, but she really wants some weapon cards, and she's going to risk anything to get them. Oh, no. Not today, it would seem. Well, rather than uselessly burn sensor cards, the Molnir is going to content herself with fixing the malfunction and hoping that it doesn't come back. Where are these weapon cards? Same story with the Virginia. She's going to chuck out almost everything she's got in the hope of getting something that she can actually fire at her enemy. But targeting computers are still saying no. Detection's all right. It's the targeting solution that's taking a while to generate. Meanwhile, it burns cards and it may have a benefit. The Molnir is going to play battle stations and use it to allow her to use two types of sensors. So if she's going to start with passive, so 1 plus... Ooh, that's done it. The passive has picked up, or at least strengthened, the contact level on the Virginia. And she's now going to go active as well. Now, the Virginia is going to... Actually, no, she can't do anything about that. She's already got a maximum strength lock on the Molnir. Funnily enough, the active sonar did not do such a good job. So while Molnir's better off, she's not that much better off now. She draws cards and prays in a very non-communist way. Yes, Virginia still has horrible options. She really needs weapons, or at least a targeting solution for her weapons. Finally, green light goes on the board and computer says yes. The question is, what's Molnir going to do while computer is busy saying yes? Well, Molnir, rather than mess around with her incredibly dicky sonar, is just going to go for it, closing the range. Unluckily for her, Virginia's rather good at this dance and is going to keep her at arm's length as much as possible. Draw another card. Okay, more detection. Virginia, unsurprisingly, is going to fire. And look at that. That very harassed weapons officer is now thinking, let's see the Soviets dodge this one. And he may be onto something because, unfortunately, the Soviets have no more evasive action cards. They get a bit of slight satisfaction from detecting the weapon launch and thus getting a better handle on the Virginia. But this may kill them. So 5 plus the Virginia's rating of 2 for 7... Oh, that hits. Oh, a sensor times 2 and an attack. Okay, that very convincingly destroys the Molnir. So it has been an extremely painful engagement for NATO. They've lost the USS Simpson, which is a very painful tactical setback. However, they've deprived the Soviet Navy of well, one extremely mediocre submarine, but also one ace submarine, and gained a measure of revenge for everything that went wrong in the previous scenario, the submarine duel. Most importantly, from a strategic perspective, the convoy to Iceland is safe, and the Virginia will be able to return to the main escort force and strengthen it with her presence. So that was a sub versus surface ship duel. I hope you all found that interesting and enjoyable, and most importantly, well, equally importantly, I hope it made sense to those of you who are still trying to get to grips with the differences between how surface ships work in this game. If anything wasn't clear, please, as always, do drop me a comment, a query, anything at all. I'll be happy to try and answer your questions. And as ever, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to those of you who've been following the attack sub side of things. It's always good to see you here. Your company, both in this series and on the channel more broadly, if you've been following that too, is always appreciated. I will be making some more attack sub videos in the near future. In fact, I'm in touch with a gentleman who's very kindly sent me some amazing Falklands campaign scenarios that I'm just getting my head round at the moment. And I hope to be making videos based on those in a few weeks' time. So watch this space, attack sub fans. Do take care. Thanks again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye.